Welcome. This is Lesson 1 of Stellar Performance 101. In this lesson, you are going to learn the history of astrology. I'm going to be talking about where astrology has come from and where it is going. I'm also going to be showing you how to use astrology in your business. So here's what you're going to need to do next. You're going to need your workbook, and you can download it now. You can use it to follow along in our lesson. So let's get started. So I just want to introduce myself to you and tell you a little bit about my background and my intentions for you with this program. So I have a background in organizational psychology and human resources and organizational development, and I worked for many years in the corporate world and in nonprofits and government, helping companies with their people in various ways. One of the ways was career development. I also helped with team building, with developing managers, and so on. So I have a lot of experience with developing people and developing companies, the people element of companies. In addition, I went to school to be a coach, and I have used coaching one-on-one with many people and in the corporate and team environment as well. Almost everything that I do has a coaching element. As well, I learned astrology, and astrology is much like some of the other personality assessments that I am certified in. I'm certified in Myers-Briggs, which is also called MBTI for short, and Personality Dimensions, which is the Canadian version of True Colors. And those assessments look at personality and are used in various ways to help with self-knowledge, with interpersonal relationships, and so on. And they are so much like astrology that, in fact, I used to have managers say to me, "Oh yeah, this is kind of like astrology," that it kind of made me wonder what is the history and what is the roots of personality assessments. And when you look into it, you start to see the connections. So in this program, I'm going to talk to you a bit about that as well. But my overall intention for you with this course, and hopefully you have intentions of your own, but my intention is for you to become a stellar leader. So imagine yourself to be a protostar. So we are all born with a birth chart or a map giving us our potential. And as we grow and develop, our potential takes form, much like a protostar. A protostar is the beginnings of a star. It's where everything is sort of turning and compressing and moving together to build into that beautiful star. And actually, if you look at protostars, they are quite beautiful. So that potential within you is really quite beautiful. And we actually have to do the work. We have to sort of move with it and dive into it to develop it into becoming a stellar performer, into a star. So the reason that this is so important is that leaders, managers, people who are coaches that are working with others need to have done that work in order to have that impact, or an impact that they want to have. And so we start with ourselves, and then we move to helping others. So from protostar to stellar performer, that is my intention for you with this program. And you're going to see how incredible astrology is for helping you to do that. So what is the history? Where on earth did astrology come from? So astrology has its roots in Egyptian times. But when we look into the history, there's not a lot of history books. There's lots of symbols and so on when you're looking at Egyptian history, but there isn't a lot of written stuff. And so really when it starts to, be written and take form is during Greek times, and Greek times were after Egyptian times. And so what we know now as Western astrology is rooted in the Greek tradition. And if you look at the stars, the name of the planets, and even the stars, they are named after Greek gods and goddesses. So Greek and Roman gods and goddesses. So they have their root in that time period. So I have a quote for you here. So few people admit to belief in astrology, but I am yet to meet anyone who doesn't know their star sign. And that was P.K. Shaw. So it is very interesting that astrology is something that everybody knows. I mean, there used to be like, what's your sign? Everybody knew a little bit about astrology. But really what we know of astrology these days is it's like the newspapers. It's on the surface level. It's the newspapers. It's what's in Cosmo. It's very linked to romantic things, or now we're seeing some things about Mercury retrograde and all the mess ups with travel and communication and so on. And so we are starting to see how it is actually so much more than just romantic compatibility. And so if you go back into Greek times, the father of Western medicine, Hippocrates, said that a physician without knowledge of astrology has no right to call himself a physician. Wow. So here we are on one hand where there's these people who are looking at astrology in the newspapers and Cosmo and kind of ridiculing it. And back in the day, here's Hippocrates saying, you can't even call yourself a physician, a doctor, without some knowledge of astrology. So why on earth would he say that? And it's very interesting that Hippocrates would say that, because Hippocrates he developed a medicine that really moved away from the belief that we were sick because of punishment from the gods, or as something that was outside of us, and came to the knowledge that it's a product of our environment, of our diet, of our living habits, and so on. And he actually came up with 4 types of people, and he was the first to sort of formulate a temperament or a type of person. And those are the sanguine, the choleric, the melancholic, and the phlegmatic. And I always trip over that one, but phlegmatic. And what we also get from Hippocrates was the Hippocratic Oath. And the Hippocratic Oath is still used today. It's the symbol right here. This is the symbol for the Hippocratic Oath, and it's within medicine, and it just speaks about a high level of professionalism and ethics. And so all medicine follows the Hippocratic Oath. So this is very interesting. Somebody who spoke about high ethics and about moving away from this sort of woo-woo factor, something outside of ourselves, gods and so on, coming down to punish us, spoke about astrology being very important to knowing medicine and to knowing and understanding people when it came to medicine. Interesting, because we moved away from that. And so actually astrology throughout history has gone through many phases. So as I said, it's been used throughout history. Go back to Egyptian times, you will see it. You will also see it across cultures. You'll see it in Indian culture, and they have their version, Vedic astrology or Jyotish astrology. You'll see it in Tibetan culture. You'll see it in Chinese culture. You'll see it in just about every culture that there is. At one point, there was actually no separation between astrology and astronomy. So the learned people would look up at the sky and they would look at the stars and how they were operating, and as part of that, they also looked at the symbolic meaning, or the energy that was emitting, or that was at play with those the planetary alignments. The Age of Enlightenment was this 200-year period where everything was thrown into question. And this happened with people like Galileo and Kepler, who looked at the planets, and they had presumed that everything was revolving around the Earth. And they discovered that actually, no, the Earth is revolving around the sun, and all these other planets are revolving around the sun. The sun was the center and not the Earth. So we had this geocentric, sounds like egocentric, very similar. It is actually just a perspective, this perspective from Earth that we believed in. This was thrown into total question as they discovered this was not true. And what happened during that time is this need to be objective, this need to stand back, and the scientific process of objective, coming up with a hypothesis, testing it, and science began to grow. At that point, astrology, the symbolic meaning of astrology, became separate from astronomy, and they became two fields. And astrology went in this sort of department of being woo-woo, let's call it. It was downplayed. It was considered not the truth. But perhaps I would say that this was something that was necessary. I always believe that it is necessary to question what we believe. And so this was a period of questioning beliefs. During that time, we have to remember the huge focus wasn't on personality. Personality was something that was actually, understanding our personality and ourselves was something that was actually developed. I'd say really, really developed within the last 200 years. It does show up before that, obviously, with Hippocrates, but our personality and the extent that it has become something that is so important within our society and within our understanding of ourselves was not something that was the main focus back in those days. So the main focus was on the mundane events. So timing of things, when things were going to happen, was there going to be a war, was there going to be something like an earthquake or something that was related to nature. And so astrology's focus was based on what was going to happen that was sort of outside of themselves, and not so much on understanding ourselves. With that, and during that time, astrology was something that was actually only in the hands of the learned. And because it was mathematical, it required you to have a protractor and, to be able to draw a chart and to be able to map out on that chart where the planets were on at a specific time. And it is very, very detailed work and very laborious. So this kind of knowledge and this kind of skill was really only held in the hands of some people. And there was a risk of error. So obviously, if you were good at it, you probably didn't have that much error, but there's definitely a risk of error. There was also the risk of the charlatan. This is because not everybody had access to this knowledge. How would you know if they were telling you the truth, if they actually had this knowledge? Somebody could say, I'm an astrologer and I could tell you all of these things that are going to be or that are happening, and you wouldn't have any way to question that. And so this became something that people feared, because how did they know that they were not being duped? I mean, yes, somebody could come and say they were an astrologer and they had all of this knowledge and they had all of these, they were able to predict things, but then there were others who used that inappropriately and did not know anything about astrology. And this is one of the reasons why laws came about and why the church went against it. So it is actually something that I think the Catholic Church is still against. I'm not Catholic, but it's one of those things that it does come into question within the church. And I recently met somebody who is a leader in the Catholic Church, actually is, I guess they're called deacons, and has a priest who is his mentor, and he's an astrologer. And I asked him, how does this jive with your mentor, who's also the priest? And he said, well, what was believed with the church was that we have free will, and free will is what allows us to decide our fate, which allows us to choose how we will decide to live. And in the church's mind, that is becoming a Christian. So that is a decision. And so what they believed was that astrology took away that free will and was deterministic. It was fatalistic. And so this is actually not what astrology is. And so he was able to explain and convince his priest that this is not actually what astrology is. And so he practices astrology, and the church is fine with it. So that's wonderful. But it does show you where that position came from. It, again, is a power that is almost in competition with God, where in fact it is not. It is an energy that is at play in creation, and it is something that we can pay attention to and decide. So we still have free will with astrology. What's also very interesting is that as time went by and we got more complicated instruments to look at the skies and so on, we discovered new planets. And those new planets were given names, and they were also given energy, and they came into play within astrology. So you might be thinking, okay, new planets. What happened before those planets were there? Well, just as we are becoming more conscious, when we become more conscious, we notice things that we didn't notice before. In Buddhism, they call this the dharma. So they exist, but they are not in our consciousness until they become relevant or important. And so planets that are newer, like Uranus and Pluto keeps being upgraded and downgraded, but I think right now it's a planet, they have come into our consciousness as we have become aware of their energy at play in our lives. And this is both within, in our personality, and at play within society. Uranus is the planet of change, and there have been, and as soon as it was discovered, all kinds of change has happened, and change is happening like, at a light speed that we can't even really keep track of it on a level that we never knew prior to the 200 years ago that it was discovered. So what has really revolutionized astrology is the discovery of computers and computer programs and computer software programs. We now have software programs that give us very accurate charts, and we don't have to calculate it using a hand and a protractor in our mathematics. So this has really revolutionized it. And I mean, these software programs are only about 30 years old. I mean, so that's very, very recent. But anybody can pull up a chart and have a very accurate chart of themselves. Prior to this, only kings and queens and emperors could do this and figure out and prior to this, back in the day, people didn't even really pay attention to their birthday or time. Somewhat, but not really. So now we know when we were born, we know, many of us know our birth time, and if we don't, we can figure it out. And we have these computers and software programs that are able to generate exactly where the planets were when we were born. And so it just becomes a matter of interpretation. Okay, so how are these energies playing out in my life? And what does this say about the roadmap of my life? Anybody can have access to it. And that is one of the things that one of the reasons why I'm sharing this with you, because you have access to it and you don't need to put that power into somebody else's hands. Maybe somebody like me who has studied astrology for quite a while can better understand what your chart is saying, but you have the potential to understand it just as much. And you also have the potential to understand others when you look at their charts and how you are working and getting along with them. So that's where modern astrology is sort of taken a turn. It's not only just looking at the mundane events, but also it allows us to understand the energy that's at play within our being, within just about anything that's created. So our personality, we can look at who we are, we can look at a company and see what it is, we can look at a relationship, even a marriage, the day and time that couple were married, and tell you about that relationship, or a partnership in business, the day and time that they came together in partnership, and tell you about that partnership. So it is really quite amazing. And so that's where astrology is heading. It's heading in this direction of being something that everybody has access to, that can help us to understand ourselves and where we are going, and that can be used as a tool for making decisions and making choices. It isn't anything that is, when it's used correctly, that is put upon us, but it is just as though you were taking a trip and you pulled out a map and you looked at it from time to time to see where you were going. And another way of looking at it is that you've walked out the door and you, before walking out the door, turn on the TV and you check the weather station. It's really just looking at what's at play. Is it going to rain? Is it going to be sunny? And when we know what is at play, then we can prepare. We can have our rubber boots, or we can have our suntan lotion and face the day. So that is what astrology is and where it is headed. So a little bit about business astrology. Business astrology is, business is something that is also quite new. The incorporation of a company was something that came about the last 200 years. J.P. Morgan said, and J.P. Morgan is the founder of Morgan Chase, the bank. Millionaires don't use astrology, billionaires do. And it's not that J.P. Morgan was out there letting everybody know his trade secrets. It's that this quote came out of a deposition in court of somebody who was, his astrologer was being questioned as to whether they were doing something illegal or not. And they were eventually acquitted of that so-called crime because it was proved that astrology is just a tool, and it is something that can really show you the energy at play. So how do we use it in business? And so here I have a picture of, this is Queen Elizabeth I, and Queen Elizabeth I had her own astrological advisor. And so the person here who's doing a little bit of magic, it looks like, is John Dee. John Dee was her personal astrologer, and he came up with her coronation date, and he advised her on many issues, including the idea of the British Empire, which, well, you know, we know where that led, but it was, you know, quite a powerful tool for Queen Elizabeth to use. In those days, it was also something that, again, the church held into question or whatever, but it didn't stop Queen Elizabeth and other royal figures from using the knowledge. And today, we don't have any problem, thanks to J.P. Morgan and that court case with Evangeline Adams, that it is something that we have, it is not against the law, we can use it, it is something that will help us to navigate and that we can use in our business. And so I'm going to show you some of the ways that we can do that. So in business, it's important that we understand ourselves, like I said in the beginning, for personal leadership and for interpersonal skills. And we can use astrology for that in terms of looking at the natal chart. The natal chart will tell you where the planets are and in what signs they are in, and they will give you some information about how you operate, how you communicate, what your emotional needs are, what your drive is. So that's stuff that's all contained in your natal chart. And synastry charts are charts that compare two people. So do they communicate in the same way? Do they have conflict with their emotional needs? Do they have the same idea of drive or values? And so when they are, you know, when they work, when they are aligned, it can feel very natural, and you probably don't even question it. You just enjoy the relationship. But when they are at odds, this can create some friction, and it becomes important for you to know how you are operating in that situation and what others need. So the synastry chart can give you some explanation about that relationship. And primarily, the Stellar Performance program is centered around this first level of business, personal leadership and interpersonal skills, and helping you to understand yourself and others. Business astrology can also go deeper, and at this level, if you're just learning astrology, this will be difficult for you, and so you may want to hire an astrologer for the next two things I'm going to talk about, but I'm going to introduce them to you so that you can see the value of using astrology in your business. So the other thing is you can look at your business strengths and weaknesses, and to do that, you would look at when the company was born. And the easiest way to do that is to look at the incorporation chart. But some companies are not incorporated. Some of them, you just began on a certain day. You know, hung up your shingle and you started selling your wares. So you could also use, if you know what the start date of your company or your first money transaction, to figure out when the company was born. Even if you do those two things and then you incorporate, your incorporation chart it's like the same as if you're dating somebody and then you get married. That marriage date or that incorporation date takes on a new energy, and your relationship, or in this case your business, becomes something quite different. And I have clients who have seen this, like they said, I incorporated and something happened. I don't know what it was. And then I usually am able to tell them what it is. So the strengths and weaknesses are very important. So you can look at that in terms of your leadership within the company, in terms of the finances, in terms of your product, your customers, investors. All of that is shown in the incorporation chart. And so you can see just basically, you know, the roadmap of it in the incorporation chart. And then when you look at the transits, and the transits are just as the planets move and continue on each day, they aspect the chart, and they show you what's happening now or in the future. And so with that, understanding what is happening now or in the future by looking at where the planets are going to be aspecting that chart, you can start to strategic plan. So this is a very different way of strategic planning, but why not know what energy is going to be at play and what is going to be working in your favor in order to make some decisions about your company? You may know, I want to be buying real estate for this portion of my company, but looking at your chart will tell you when that venture will be challenging and when is a good time to be able to do that. And so instead of working against the energy, you're going to work with it and take advantage of it. And similarly, if you see on the horizon that there are some challenges, just having that heads up, you can sort of plan or keep your eye open for things that may come up. And this can help to sort of reduce any sort of negative financial impacts or negative interpersonal impacts or any sort of negative impacts you can plan for and understand better and manage better. And that is the beauty and the opportunity that's within astrology. So again, understanding personality, and this is guiding leadership. When we get into leadership, it's really about understanding ourselves. And so it's to get into that unconscious material. And surprisingly, you can see exactly what your unconscious material is in your astrology chart. You can see the conflicts that you may have and the negative false beliefs that you may have formed. And you can take all of that and work with it to better develop yourself, to make the unconscious conscious. And that process helps you to really understand yourself and understand your personality and to develop your personality. And ultimately, that helps with interpersonal dynamics. Once you understand yourself, even if you don't understand that other person, you're able to know how you are operating in that situation and to have some level of self-management. And that's very important for leaders. So Jung, I just want to just share with you his quote. Jung, who used astrology with his clients, and I'm going to talk about this in lesson 3. Lesson 3, we get into using astrology as a personality assessment, but Jung didn't actually use MBTI. MBTI was developed by two people who really liked the work of Jung and developed an assessment tool to figure out personality based on his theories, but Jung actually used astrological charts. And so the quote from him is, "Astrology is assured of recognition from psychology without further restrictions because astrology represents the summation of all psychological knowledge of antiquity." So he's giving it this like, wow, you can look at astrology and really understand what is in that psychological underpinning, what's underneath things here. So guiding finance, that is then that next level of using business astrology. Here's another quote: "The only function of economic forecasting is to make astrology look respectable." So if you don't know who John Kenneth Galbraith is, he is the finance minister of Greece. And Greece, as you know, right now is in a little bit of financial difficulty. and he is trying to get things on track, and he is actually an economist. And he made this sort of tongue-in-cheek comment about astrology, but I found it very interesting because economic forecasting is just as accurate and sometimes less accurate than astrology. So I thought that was quite interesting because, again, with astrology, you can understand a company's strengths and weaknesses. Actually, you can also look at a country and the birth of that country. And Greece is a little bit difficult because they have so many possible birth dates, but the United States has a very clear birthday. And you can see exactly what's going on with the United States. You can see what's on the horizon, as I said, and it can help you to make decisions. And I just want to comment here about business astrology versus financial astrology, because there's a lot of financial astrologers out there, and financial astrologers basically use the energy of what's at play in the stars and with the planets and the moon and so on to make predictions around the stock market. And there's some levels of success with it, but this is not what I will be teaching you. I think that the stock market it's a new creation, and it's one that will also change and evolve. But business astrology is something that's looking at the company and the members within the company and how the company actually functions and works and makes money. It's not just about money. Financial astrology is just about money. Again, I said that you can do some timing and planning and decision making, and some of the people who actually use this in recent times were Ronald Reagan and Diana Spencer. So you can look at mundane events or just what's happening in the sky to make some sort of predictions about things, or you can time events. A lot of Ronald Reagan's speeches were timed around astrology. Some things in American politics have a date you can't change. This is the time, and so you can't time those events. But some of his events were timed so that he could ensure that he was winning political debates and so on. Okay, let's recap what you've discovered in today's lesson. By now you should have a better understanding of the history of astrology, where it's been and how it has evolved, and how you can use it in your business and life. What I want you to do now is go to your workbook. You're going to need to do your exercises and actually do them, because as you do, you're going to learn what I've just taught you. That's it for today. From proto-star to stellar performer, my hope is that you live the potential of your birthright. When you evolve, you have evolved relationships and an evolved business. It's the key to making money, being good, and doing good. Thanks for watching and discovering who you really are. Bye for now.